Get out, you pathetic country trash. No. Nay, a worthless zero like you belongs in the restroom with a mop, not touching a multi-million-dollar corporate contract. Get the hell out of my sight before I throw you out myself. Then, the department manager's screeching voice pierced through the suffocating atmosphere of the 31st floor executive office. Ay, Sagrada Familia. A thick stack of project documents struck the young intern's face with brutal force, sending crisp white sheets exploding into the air and scattering across the polished marble floor. Every single employee in the project department froze instantly. No one dared to breathe, each fixing their eyes intensely on their computer screens to avoid the wealthy manager's terrifying wrath. The young intern stood completely still in the center of the room, surrounded by a ring of silent, king stares. A faint smudge of black printer ink stained his gaunt cheek from the impact, yet his eyes did not waver for a single second. He stared directly into the eyes of the pristine, luxury-branded man standing before him. His absolute silence was not a sign of cowardice. It was the quiet accumulation of a massive subterranean storm, waiting for the perfect day to completely obliterate this elite arrogance. Time seemed to freeze within this lavish office, a place heavily saturated with the scent of old money and ruthless class discrimination, where the self-proclaimed elite gladly crushed the dignity of the poor beneath their leather heels. But to truly understand why a young man from a remote rural village had to endure such monstrous public humiliation, we must rewind the clock back to 3 months ago. La Sagrada Familia. It was a torrential rainy day during the peak of the corporate recruitment season. Sagrada Familia, when the elite property conglomerate opened its heavily guarded doors to a new wave of interns. Amidst a sea of wealthy candidates dressed in bespoke designer suits, exuding expensive colognes, and loudly bragging about their prestigious master's degrees from London and New York, he appeared. He wore a faded, cheap shirt and carried a backpack with frayed edges. He possessed no wealthy family background to back him up, nor did he hold any million-dollar social connections. The only assets he brought into the tower were a razor-sharp, analytical mind and an unyielding desire to prove his true worth. Yet, from the very first second his worn shoes stepped through the grand glass entrance, he immediately understood the brutal rules of the high society game. A department manager, a man excessively proud of his aristocratic bloodline, and a corporate title obtained purely through shameless flattery, looked at him with absolute disgust. The manager did not even bother to read his academic resume, merely throwing a repulsive glance at the intern's old backpack before ordering him to become the office servant responsible for clearing trash and brewing tea for the entire floor. For 3 long months, while the interns from wealthy families were handed lucrative, high-profile projects, he was forced to carry the heaviest, most grueling burdens in complete isolation. He was always the first person to arrive at the office in the early hours of the morning to clean the desks. And he was invariably the last person to leave the massive skyscraper long after the clock hands had passed midnight. Dios. The aggressive rhythmic thumping of the printer running late into the night, the dim LED light shining upon his exhausted, yet fiercely determined face, then stood as the sole witnesses to his relentless struggle in the dark. He accepted being completely ostracized, and he willingly acted as the human shield for every systemic error that the elite employees shamelessly blamed on him. Because he knew a fundamental truth of the world. The longer a man walks through the darkest shadows, the sharper his eyes become. Reality can never be permanently hidden beneath a shiny, tailored vest. The elite employees of the department called him the Phantom Coder because he only existed to fix their disasters when the sun went down. Limoso. Every morning, as the sun began to paint the glass walls of the skyscraper in gold, he had already completed his first 4 hours of work. Lelia. He wiped the dust from the mahogany desks of people who would never look him in the eye. Hele, Sagrada Familia. And he organized files that contained millions of dollars he could only dream of. The clock struck 9. The office filled with the sound of laughter, sayonji and perfume, and talks of weekend trips to Europe. Nobody greeted him, except when they needed someone to blame for a late report or a broken coffee machine. Hey, country boy, make sure this report is on my desk by noon. Don't screw up the numbers, like your people usually do. Senior associate sneered, tossing a messy folder onto his desk. He did not reply, only nodded slightly and accepted the burden with a calm, unreadable face. His silence was perceived as weakness, an invitation for them to pile more work onto his shoulders. While the other interns spent their days networking at expensive lunches and taking credit for group projects, he sat in his small corner, drowning in raw data. He analyzed market trends, and calculated financial risks, studied the legal loopholes of the city's real estate market. Deep bags under his eyes grew darker each week. Sagrada Familia and his skin turned from the lack of sunlight. But behind that exhausted exterior, his mind was operating at maximum capacity, memorizing every corporate structure, every hidden asset, every dirty secret of the elite property conglomerate. He discovered that the company was not as stable as it appeared on the news. It was a hollow giant, rotting from the inside due to corruption and arrogance. And the man leading this decay was none other than the brilliant, American-educated department manager who treated him like dirt. One night, around 2 in the morning, the heavy silence of the floor was broken by the sharp, metallic sound of the printer. He stood there, alone, watching the pages slide out one by one, reflecting the cold light of the monitor onto his face. The data did not lie. The manager had been inflating the value of the company's rural land holdings by hundreds of millions to secure massive loans. It was a dangerous game of financial fraud that could collapse the entire conglomerate if the truth ever came out. He carefully took the original printouts, a few, stamped with the manager's personal digital signature, and locked them away in a secure, encrypted folder. He knew he was holding a live grenade, but he also knew that the time to pull the pin had not yet arrived. He went back to his desk, picked up his cheap pen, and continued to write his own research paper on the upcoming mega project, working as if his life depended on it. Department manager Richard was a man who believed that appearance was everything. He wore tailored, three-piece suits, drove a matte black sports car, and spent his mornings lecturing the staff about the mindset of the top 1%. To Richard, human beings were divided into two categories: those who were born to rule, those who were born to serve. The young intern with the faded shirt was the perfect target for his daily displays of superiority. During a mandatory Monday morning strategy meeting, in front of 50 senior executives and board members, Richard decided to turn the intern into a public example. "Look at this," Richard laughed, pointing a gold laser pointer at the intern's old, Lele-scratched smartphone, resting on the edge of the table. "This company represents luxury, wealth, and the future of the nation's elite. Yet, we have people bringing garbage like this into our inner sanctuary." The room erupted into polite, cruel laughter, with several junior employees nodding eagerly to please their boss. "Tell me, country boy, does your village even have a 4G network? Did you have to climb a tree just to download our corporate handbook?" Richard sneered, his eyes gleaming with malicious pleasure. The intern sat perfectly still, his hands folded neatly on his lap, his expression as calm as a frozen lake. "The device might be old, sir, but the data it processes is highly accurate," the intern replied, his voice calm, steady, devoid of any fear. Richard's smile instantly vanished, replaced by an ugly twist of rage at the audacity of a low-level worker talking back to him. "Accurate? You don't know anything about accuracy. Your mind is as primitive as your background," Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the glass table. To humiliate him further, Richard ordered the intern to stand in the back of the room for the remainder of the 3-hour presentation. But as Richard began to present the company's financial forecast for the upcoming mega project, the intern noticed something terrifying. The numbers Richard was using were completely fabricated, stolen directly from an early, unverified draft that the intern had left on the shared server. Richard had caked the flawed data in beautiful graphics and complex jargon, presenting it as his own masterstroke of financial genius. The board members were mesmerized, applauding Richard's vision, completely unaware that they were looking at a financial death sentence. The intern looked at the giant screen, then looked at Richard's proud, smirking face, and a faint, almost invisible smile appeared on his lips. The trap had been set, not by the intern, but by Richard's own boundless arrogance and greed. The elite manager had just built his entire future on a foundation of stolen, broken glass, and the intern was more than willing to let it shatter. As autumn arrived, a cold breeze swept through the concrete canyons of the financial district, bringing a suffocating tension inside the corporate headquarters. The entire conglomerate was on the brink of an absolute financial collapse. Their survival rested on a single, massive thread: a multi-million-dollar strategic partnership with the Supreme Global Alliance, say, an elite international fund that held 51% of the vital voting shares in the market. For weeks, Richard had been pacing around his glass-walled corner office, sweating through his luxury shirts, knowing his career would end if he failed to secure this deal. He had no real ideas, no vision and no true understanding of the complex asset shifts happening in the rural development sectors. So, he did what every desperate elite tyrant does. He turned his predatory eyes toward the quietest corner of the office. The intern had spent 14 consecutive nights building a comprehensive, groundbreaking master plan for the alliance. It was a brilliant piece of financial architecture, strategy that beautifully balanced corporate profits with localized community trust. On a rainy Thursday evening, Richard walked up to the intern's desk, slammed his gold-ringed hand onto the keyboard, demanded the final file, and over the drive. Country boy, a low-life like you, doesn't have the clearance to hold a document of this magnitude, Richard whispered maliciously. The intern looked up, his face exhausted, but his eyes completely calm, handed over the small black USB drive. Without a word, Richard snatched it with a greasy smile, completely unaware that he had just swallowed a lethal piece of bait. Then, an hour, Richard uploaded the entire master plan to the main corporate server under his own name, erasing every single trace of the intern's digital footprint. He presented it to the board of directors as his personal masterpiece, receiving a standing ovation from the senior executives. But the elite manager's boundless arrogance had blinded him to a fatal, meticulous trap hidden deep within the code of the file. The intern had subtly altered the core valuation metrics of the secondary asset sheets, betting a massive calculation error that only a master auditor could spot. More importantly, every single page of the original draft had been encoded with the intern's private, immutable digital signature, time-stamped and locked into a decentralized ledger. Richard had proudly stolen a beautiful, shiny house made of cards, and he was about to present it to the most powerful investors in the world. The intern sat in the dark hallway outside the executive suite, listening to the muffled sounds of applause. Holding a secure tablet that tracked every single access log on the server. The fuse had been lit. The stolen data was locked in. The countdown to Richard's public execution had officially begun. The night before the grand signing ceremony, the skyscraper was illuminated like a giant neon needle piercing the dark sky. A lavish pre-celebration banquet was held on the top floor, where crystal glasses clinked and expensive, thin champagne flowed into the mouths of the corporate elite. Richard was the star of the night, surrounded by beautiful influencers and powerful politicians, loudly bragging about how his brilliance saved the company. Meanwhile, 40 floors below, the air was freezing, silent Sagrada Familia, and the silence of the empty project department was broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Greasy emoji. Richard had ordered the intern to stay behind all night to manually clean the grand conference room and arrange the physical contracts for the next morning. Make sure the floor is so clean I can see my reflection when I ruin your life tomorrow. Richard had texted him earlier, followed by laughing emojis. The intern did not feel anger. He felt a cold, clinical detachment as he pushed the heavy mop across the dark marble floor. His shadow stretched long and thin across the glass windows, casting a lonely figure against the backdrop of a glittering city that hated the poor. The contrast was absolute. Above him was the loud, fake warmth of the elite celebration. Then around him was the honest, cold reality of labor. Exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, the silent office was suddenly pierced by the sharp, high-pitched ring of the intern's old smartphone. He pulled the scratch device from his pocket, looking at the encrypted caller ID, flashing on the cracked screen. He answered it, placing the phone to his ear. He did not speak first. Line. Everything is in position. Young master. A deeply respectful voice spoke from the other end of the line. The auditing team from the Supreme Global Alliance has just landed at the private terminal, La Melia, and the compliance reports have been delivered directly to your father's desk. The intern stood perfectly still, looking at his own reflection in the dark glass wall, his face devoid of the tired, submissive look he wore during the day. Good, the intern replied, his voice deep, authoritative, completely carrying the weight of a true ruler. Let Richard enjoy his last night of luxury, because when the sun rises, I want him to lose absolutely everything. He ended the call, placed the phone back into his worn pocket, continued to mop the floor with precise, calm movements. The trap was completely closed. The pieces were locked on the board, and the arrogant elite was running out of time. The next morning, the heavy rain had stopped, leaving the city air freezing and the streets glistening like shattered glass. Inside the grand office of the project department, the atmosphere was completely electric. Its executive filled with the murmurs of nervous executives. Richard stood at the front of the room, checking his expensive gold watch every few seconds, his face flushed with an ugly, Dios para, arrogant pride. He looked down at the physical folders arranged on the table. Suddenly, his eyes caught a tiny, almost invisible print error on the corporate seal page. It was a minor smudge. Something an ordinary eye would never notice. To Richard, it was the perfect opportunity to show his absolute power. He spun around, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. and locked his eyes on the young intern standing quietly by the door. "Get out, you pathetic country trash." Richard's screeching voice pierced through the suffocating atmosphere of the 31st floor executive office. "A worthless zero like you belongs in the restroom with a mop, touching a multi-million-dollar corporate contract. Get the hell out of my sight before I throw you out myself," Richard roared, lifting the thick stack of project document high into the air. He hurled the sessional papers straight at the intern's face with brutal force, sending crisp white sheets exploding into the room. Papers scattered across the polished marble floor, fluttering like broken wings around the intern's worn leather shoes. Sick. Every single employee in the project department froze instantly, their bodies stiffening in their luxury ergonomic chairs. No one dared to breathe, each fixing their eyes intensely on their computer screens to avoid the wealthy manager's terrifying wrath. The young intern stood completely still in the center of the room, so surrounded by a ring of silent, mocking stares. A faint smudge of black printer ink stained his gaunt cheek from the impact. Yet his eyes did not waver for a single second. He did not look down at the ruined papers on the floor, nor did he look at the employees who were snickering into their hands. He stared directly into the eyes of the pristine, luxury-branded man standing before him, his gaze piercingly cold and absolutely empty of fear. His absolute silence was not a sign of cowardice. It was the quiet accumulation of a massive subterranean storm. "Are you deaf, country boy? I told you to pick up your garbage and get out of my company," Richard shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the exit. The intern slowly reached up. Custodia wiped the ink stain from his cheek with a steady hand and looked at the clock on the wall. It was exactly 9:30 in the morning, the exact time the Alliance F phalanx was scheduled to arrive at the front gates. "I will leave, Richard." The intern spoke, his voice surprisingly calm, echoing through the dead silence of the office. Remember this moment? Because when I walk back through that door, you will be the one cleaning this floor with your bare hands." Eva. Richard burst into a loud, mocking laugh, shaking his head as the intern turned around and walked out of the glass doors without looking back. At exactly 9:40, a fleet of 5 black, armored luxury sedans pulled up to the grand entrance of the corporate headquarters. The security team cleared the entire lobby, pushing aside ordinary citizens and low-level workers to create a pristine path for the visitors. The CEO of the property conglomerate, followed by 30 senior board members, stood in a perfect, submissive line at the front doors. Richard was right there among them, straightening his designer tie. Sagrada Familia, his heart pounding with excitement as he prepared to steal the spotlight. The door of the leading vehicle opened, now, and out stepped the chief legal counsel of the Supreme Global Alliance, followed by 10 elite auditors. The aura they carried was immense, crushing weight of international law and billions of dollars in sovereign wealth. The CEO of the conglomerate stepped forward, his hand extended, a nervous, fake smile plastered across his face. Welcome, distinguished partners, to our headquarters. Ilfe. Everything is prepared for the historic signing of our strategic alliance, the CEO said. The chief counsel did not smile, nor did he shake the CEO's hand. Segralia. He merely adjusted his glasses and looked around the grand lobby. Where is the master administrator? The chief counsel asked, his voice sharp, clear, and absolutely commanding. Our agreement states that the final transfer of 51% of the voting shares must be authorized by your new majority owner. The CEO froze, his smile faltering, as he looked back at his board members in absolute confusion. I apologize, sir, but I am the CEO and the primary chairperson of this conglomerate. The CEO replied, his voice trembling slightly. There is no other majority owner. Our family holds the controlling block of shares. The chief counsel pulled a sleek, encrypted digital ledger from his leather briefcase and held it up for the entire board to see. As of 2 o'clock this morning, your primary creditor bank sold 90% of your defaulted debt bonds to our alliance, the council stated. Ale, and those bonds were immediately converted into equity shares by the sole order of our global foundation's heir. The man who owns 51% of your company, the man who decides if you stay in business or go to prison today, is already inside this building. Jeto. Richard felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck, his mind racing, as he looked at the powerful legal team in front of him. A terrible, suffocating realization began to creep into his chest. Leia. A dark shadow of doubt that made his knees shake. Who is this here? Sir, Richard asked, his voice cracking, using all of its previous arrogant strength. The chief counsel turned his sharp eyes toward Richard, cold, knowing smile appearing on his lips. His name is confidential, but he has been auditing your department personally for the past 3 months, the counsel replied. Dio. And he just notified us that he was violently ejected from the building by a low-level manager less than 10 minutes ago. The grand conference room of the elite property conglomerate was completely silent, except for the soft hum of the projection screen descending from the ceiling. Richard stood at the head of the long, mahogany table, holding his stolen presentation clicker, his face flush with excitement as he prepared to deliver his fake data. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the room burst open, cutting through the tense atmosphere like a lightning strike. Every executive turned around instantly, their mouths dropping open in absolute shock as a figure walked into the room. It was the young intern. He was no longer wearing his faded shirt or his torn shoes. He was dressed in a pristine, also custom-tailored charcoal suit that fitted him perfectly, accentuating his calm and authoritative stature. Behind him walked a team of 6 elite corporate lawyers from the Supreme Global Alliance, all carrying heavy, encrypted leather briefcases. Richard's face drained of color instantly, turning a sickening shade of white as he pointed a shaking finger at the young man. "You, what the hell are you doing here?" "Security. Throw this trash out immediately," Richard screamed, his voice cracking with panic. But nobody moved. Titi Lillian and the security guards at the door immediately stood at attention, bowing their heads deeply. The chief counsel of the alliance stepped forward, ignoring Richard entirely, and walked straight to the side of the young intern. The chief counsel placed his briefcase on the table, and it with a crisp, metallic click, and bowed deeply at a perfect 90-degree angle to the young man. "Everything has been finalized, young master," the chief counsel stated, his voice echoing clearly through the frozen room. "Then, Zafe, your father has signed the definitive transfer of assets to the familia, and the bank has processed the conversion of the defaulted corporate debt. As of 90 seconds ago, you officially hold 51% of the voting shares, making you the absolute chairman of this conglomerate." The CEO of the conglomerate felt his chest tighten, his breath caught in his throat as he stumbled backward into his leather chair, staring at the intern. Richard froze, his body turning as cold as ice as his presentation clicker slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. The country boy he had spent 3 months shut up, the boy he had forced to clean his toilet and paint his office, was the very hand that held his life. The young intern walked slowly to the head of the table, his eyes locked onto Richard's trembling, terrified face with a gaze that could pierce steel. He did not raise his voice. He simply leaned forward, resting his hands on the smooth wood, Sagrada Familia, and spoke with an authority that shook the room. "You told me yesterday that my people only know how to handle dirt, Richard," the intern whispered, dangerous smile appearing on his lips. "Well, today, I am going to use that very dirt to bury your entire career." The intern tapped the screen of his personal tablet, Lee Sagrada Familia, and the giant overhead projector instantly flashed a new set of data onto the wall. It was not the beautiful, fabricated presentation that Richard had stolen. It was a full, forensic audit of Richard's financial records. On the screen, hundreds of transactions showed how Richard had embezzled money from the rural development funds to pay for his luxury sports car and his penthouse apartment. Zida. More than that, the original draft of the mega project design appeared, clearly embedded with the intern's digital encryption signature. This is identity theft, copyright infringement, corporate fraud on a multi-million-dollar scale, the chief counsel announced coldly. "We have already submitted these original ledger printouts, signed by Richard himself, the Federal Financial Crimes Bureau." Richard's knees completely buckled under the immense weight of the revelation. He crashed heavily to the floor, his luxury suit gathering dust. Fideo. He looked around the room frantically, silently, begging his regular sycophants and junior associates for help. Every single one of them looked away, completely abandoning him. The very people who had laughed at his cruel jokes the day before were now staring at him with absolute disgust and indifference. Please, young master, please, forgive me. Didn't know I was blind. Richard sobbed, crawling on his knees across the floor toward the intern's shoes. He reached out his shaking, manicured hands, trying to grab the edge of the intern's tailored trousers, crying like a desperate child. I have a family. I have a reputation. If you do this, I will lose everything. I will go to prison. Richard wailed, his tears mixing with the dust on the floor. The intern did not move away. Satan. He simply looked down at the pathetic creature, groveling at his feet, his face entirely blank of emotion. You didn't care about my dignity when you threw those documents in my face yesterday in front of the entire company. Richard, the intern said calmly. Sivlid, you didn't care about my family when you called my people primitive and trash just to make yourself feel big. You built your entire life on the broken backs of the people you look down upon. Now, the foundation has completely rotted away. Two plainclothes police officers stepped into the conference room, their metal handcuffs gleaming under the bright fluorescent lights. They grabbed Richard by his arms, lifting him bluntly from the floor as he shrieked and kicked, his expensive shoes flying off his feet. He was dragged out of the executive suite, his cries of despair fading down the long, the hallway, as the entire board watched in absolute silence. The elite manager was gone, his wealth frozen, his reputation obliterated, and his future locked behind the concrete wall of a maximum security cell. The heavy oak doors of the conference room closed, sealing away the last echoes of Richard's desperate cries. The silence that followed was heavy, lean, and absolute, religioso, as if a long-standing disease had finally been purged from the room. The young intern, now the recognized chairman, stood at the head of the table, looking out over the panoramic view of the city skyline. The board members sat in perfect, rigid silence, their eyes fixed on him with a newfound, often terrifying respect. A company cannot build its future on the stolen blood of the people who keep it alive. The young chairman spoke, his voice calm but echoing with an unyielding power. From this day forward, promotion in this conglomerate will be measured by your integrity, your hard work, and your respect for human dignity. Any manager who abuses their position to trample on subordinates will find themselves sitting in the very same cell where Richard is being held tonight. He turned back to the table, looking directly into the lens of the world, Zirda Familia, shattering the boundary between the screen and reality. Guido, now, I ask you, the people who are watching this story unfold from the safety of your screens. If you had been sitting in that office for the past 3 months, witnessing Richard openly trample on and humiliate a defenseless young man from the countryside. What would you have done? Would you have stood up and demanded justice for a stranger, risking your own career and your own luxury salary? Or would you have buried your face in your computer screen, laughing quietly to please your toxic boss, pretending that the injustice did not exist? Society is not broken because of the cruelty of the elite. It is broken because of the absolute silence and cowardice of the majority who watch it happen. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, Sagrada Familia, and leave your honest answer in the comments below to let the world know where you stand.